Hello and welcome to another episode of Dice Masters Chronicles with me, James, and Spug. Hello, Spug.
Hey, James.
I'm being a bit slow here. Sorry, it's been a while. Dice Masters Chronicles is a series of videos in which we try to track the major meta teams, and we did a bunch in the old meta, and we have given modern 2022 rotation a bit of a chance to settle, and a couple of things have floated to the top, and we're here to talk about one of them, which Spug took to the top of Dice Fight XL3 not long ago.
Yeah, by some miracle.
Well, by the miracle of the Speed Force, as you can see.
Yes.
Just before we crack on with things, basically, Spug's going to talk about how he came up with the team and what each of the different things in it does. Then he's going to talk about his 3-turn theory, so what under optimal conditions he would be doing in his first 3 turns. Then we'll have a look at some sort of meta nasties and how he does or doesn't deal with them, and we'll round off by talking about what cards he might change were he to run the team again. I think that's everything.
That sounds good, James.
In a minute, I should be able to relax. I'm going to look pretty and manipulate the keyboard and try to keep the graphics up with what Spug is talking about. But Spug, I think I'm going to hand over to you. Basically, the question to start with is, how did the team come about? What was the thinking behind it? And how did you choose the cards? And what does each of them do?
Yep. Well, obviously, Barry Allen, the rare from Superman Crystal Crisis, is the centerpiece of the team. And as we've talked about on our DM United podcast quite regularly, he's very reminiscent of the old half-elf bard from the old meta from sort of 5 years ago now, is it? Or maybe slightly less. And basically, as you can see, his ability when he attacks, then he gets a buff for every attacking character die gets +1A and +1D for each other attacking die. So if you've got 5 attacking dice in total, including Barry Allen, then they all get +4A and +4D. So obviously that's really, really powerful because it can turn a 1/1 sidekick into a 6/6 destroyer in very little time at all. And the other, I guess, real sort of MVP of this particular team is the Mr. Sinister Global, which really helps kind of put rocket fuel under the team, because not only does it enable you to ramp quite quickly, that global where you can pay 2 generic energy, field a psychic, and then prep a die, means that you can do it pretty reliably. You don't need specific energy in order to do it, and means you can reach for a Barry on turn 2 if things go well. And then you can just basically spend the rest of the time ramping into sidekicks, provided your opponent doesn't do anything to interfere with your plans. Pretty much everything else.
What's horrible about Mr. Sinister, so not only does it provide ramp to get you there in the first place, and the sidekicks you need to build your army to empower Barry, but it also, if you lose your Barry from the field for whatever reason, or you don't roll it, Mr. Sinister culls your bag, so you just get back to it the next turn in a frighteningly quick way.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it can really easily do that if you just spend the energy just ramping instead of buying anything. And certainly in Dice Fight XL, there were a few games where all I did was buy a Barry and then just ramp using Mr. Sinister until the time came that I was able to win, which is crazy. And also the other great thing about Barry is that because of the defense buff that everything gets, even if you attack and pretty much everything is blocked, your field will almost certainly survive because they've got very high defense. So if they're being blocked by other sidekicks, they'll probably wipe out your opponent's field, but your characters will be still there the next time, apart from the ones that they left through. So it's really, it is very strong, and it can be frightening how quickly it can go from kind of 0 to hero in terms of winning. But the basic thought of the team early on was I wanted to do Barry because I thought it was really good, but I also wanted to try to pair it with a bit of control. And so early on, the first sort of iterations that I was thinking about involved Barry and then some of the classic kind of control pieces. So things like Rare Drax, potentially even things like Wonder Woman which we'll probably talk about a little bit later on in terms of control problems. But things like Typhoid Mary as well that really slow your opponent down. And my idea was a bit like the old kind of Bard team from back in the day, where people used to be able to use their control pieces to establish some sort of foothold over what the opponent was doing, and then use the Bard / Barry to then attack with everything and turn your control pieces into weapons. But the biggest problem with that is that there's no force block, or there's no static field global, which enables you to pull back characters that are forced to attack. So that makes keeping your control pieces in the field much harder. So I thought, well, I don't think control is going to be the way to go. Let's see if we can make Barry go quicker instead. And I started thinking about overcrushing characters, and the beast, which you'll see on the team, which is just basically the simple 2-cost from Dark Phoenix Saga, has built-in overcrush, and he has max 5 dice, and he's just very, very good, because obviously if you compare him with a Barry, you can get him quite easily to big stats, and he's got overcrush just like that, which is really great. I was trying to think of other things that might be useful to speed up the team. Obviously, the Dark Phoenix card is very much there for the global, so that you can knock out one of your characters, and actually that makes the second turn purchase of Barry possible, because I'll talk about a little bit about the order of buying stuff in a minute. But with Dark Phoenix there, it means that when you're rolling 6 dice, you can get enough energy to buy a Barry on a turn 2, because of the discount that she provides.
I've got the common up here, because that's what you put in the team. Is that what you had?
Yeah, it is what I had. Partly because I've got the Beast, which is an X-Men character, and Dark Phoenix's ability is that when she's fielded, you can KO one of your X-Men characters to deal 4 damage to your opponent. So it was almost an alternate win condition, because it just gives you another way of trying to get a bit of damage in. Realistically, she's a 7 cost. No, exactly. She's a 7. She's a 7 cost. It wasn't needed. And in one game that I did play in Dice Fight XL, when there was a big problem, she wouldn't have helped, because my opponent had a very stubborn Wonder Woman. But obviously she has a when-fielded ability, so that was useless. The Wolverine is there simply for the global. So and the idea with that is that you can go first, and then you are rolling 3 dice. You will hopefully roll 3 energy, including a fist, and then you can prep on turn 1, which is something I never thought I would do, because it just obviously upsets the order of stuff in your bag for the next turn. But it means that if you prep, you've spent that 1 energy, you've got 1 in transition from going first at the start of the game. Then you have 2 in your use pile on your opponent's turn, and then you can do Mr. Sinister on your opponent's turn, and that you can field a psychic and then prep a psychic. So then on turn 2, you're rolling 6 dice, and because you've got 1 in the field, you can use Dark Phoenix with a bolt to reduce the purchase cost of a Barry to 5, and then you can buy them straight away.
Very nice. We've slipped into 3-turn theory here.
Yeah, sorry. In terms of other stuff on the other stuff on the team, Doomsday is there mostly for the force attack, because if my opponent has any sort of control, I want to be able to force attack it off. Also, it can be used to just get rid of awkward things like psychics, even that your opponent might be fielding if they're using your Mr. Sinister Global, which they certainly will be. It's quite good if you can remove them to keep their field as empty as possible, so that if you do get into a Barry, you can get some damage through nice and easy. But obviously he has also got Overcrush built in as well, and he's got very good stats for a 4 cost. He's a 7/7 on top side,
Solid.
which is very, very good. The two remaining pieces are Starro, who is awkward because of his condition that means you can only field him on sides on levels 1 and 2, but his ability to steal sidekicks is absolutely fantastic, because when he's combined with Barry Allen, your opponent is probably going to be fielding sidekicks if they know if they know that you've got Barry coming. They want some blockers, but if you can pinch two of their sidekicks,
That's a horror story.
not only does it reduce the number of blockers they have, it also, because you can choose the order you do it in, you can pinch them before you calculate the Barry buff, and then you get an extra 2 across the board. So it's really strong, and Starro really helped me in some horrible situations.
It's a 4-character swing where each character is realistically going to be 5 or 6 attacks.
Yeah, exactly.
It's horrible.
Yeah, it's horrific. It really is. And then the final character card is Mr. Mind, who was quite a late addition to the team, and he's mostly there, to be honest, for some kind of mirror match type protection, because he is the rare from Super Mega Chronicle Crisis, and he enables you to use a copy of target opposing character dies when attacks ability. So obviously, if your opponent has a Barry in the field, when you attack with Mr. Mind, you can copy your opponent's Barry, and if you've got your own Barry in the field as well, then you can get the buff twice, which is pretty nice, because
bubble.
I know, exactly, because each Barry counts as a unique version on either side of the board. In terms of the basic actions,
actually, sorry, I could just interject. Even if they weren't unique, it's 1 attack, so it stacks. Even if you bought 2 of your own Barrys, right?
Oh, right, yeah, that's true. Yeah. Not that you're going to be doing that very often.
But we used to with Bard, because it was 4 cost. But
that's true.
Barry,
yeah,
not at 7, probably not.
That is a good point. Arctic Breath is really just there for the buff, because he's a fist pump, which is obviously good, particularly when you've got beasts. If you've got any of those flying around, then that's quite helpful. I hardly ever use that, if I'm honest, so that one might be likely to be changed in future. And actually,
we'll come to that.
Yeah, we will come to that. And actually, in one game I played, my opponent bought one of my Arctic Breaths and used it to stun their own Wonder Woman, so their own Wonder Woman could then not attack. I couldn't force it to attack. So that was a very clever move, and was bad for me. But my answer to that, thankfully, was Mutation, which is an amazing basic action on the opposite side of the mat, and you can obviously use that to solve quite a few problems. Not least, it can help you get Starro in the field, which is really good. It can help you get a Barry in the field if you need to. If you've bought him, if he ends up in your use pile for whatever reason, then you can swap it around. But it can be a really good defensive piece as well, because you can use it to swap things on your opponent's side. So if you need to remove something troublesome, as long as they've got something else, a character die in their use pile on your turn, you can use it to get rid of stuff, which is really very handy.
Yep.
And also it's got a spin up and a spin down in it as well, which can occasionally be useful. So those are the main points of that team.
Right. So if I can just we did sort of touch on 3-turn theory, so I can maybe, if I've understood correctly, let me try and get the cards out. So on turn 1, you prep. You want to go first, ideally. So let's say you were going
always
first.
Want to go first. Yeah.
Die in transition. Sorry, how to play. And you prep using what's his name? Wolverine. So you want a fist for that.
Yeah.
And then you leave yourself with 2 any old energy. So you don't want sidekicks, presumably.
No, definitely not.
And then you've spent 1 on the Wolverine. You've got 1 that was in transition. On your opponent's turn, then you have 2 dice in the use pile, and you use those 2 for Mr. Sinister. So you field a sidekick. You now prep a second die, and then you will draw 4 from your bag on your second turn.
Yeah.
And 1 will stay in your bag, presumably. So you end up with 6 dice rolling one psychic in the field.
Yeah.
Which, as Spug mentioned, you can use as I wanted to show you Dark Phoenix
Dark
fodder.
Phoenix. Yeah.
And you have one die in the bag.
Yeah.
So you can quite comfortably buy him on turn 2.
Yeah.
How is it different if you go second?
Yeah, going second actually is really awkward with this particular setup. And actually, I know we are not talking about changes at the moment, but actually, I would be tempted to change Arctic Breath for Villainous Pact in future, because it's actually very tricky knowing what to do, because you don't start with that one die in transition when you go second. Obviously, you're just rolling 4 dice, which you instinctively think is better, but actually, in terms of doing Mr. Sinister, it's not, because you've got to spend the die, you've got to spend the energy to get it in your use pile, in order that you can Mr. Sinister. So even if you buy a 2-cost die, whether that be a Beast or a Mr. Mind, you still can only Mr. Sinister once. You can't prep. So going first is way better. If I was to switch Arctic Breath for Villainous Pact, for example, then on turn 1 you've got a much better chance of being able to do what you need, because you could prep twice.
I will show you Villainous
straight
Pact.
up.
That is actually exactly what I had on my Barry team. For all the good it did me, I did have Villainous Pact and Wolverine, and I going second I could prep Barry. Not just buy him, but prep him, because your bags.
Right. Yeah.
Because if you go second, then your bag's empty.
Yeah.
Right. Because
you prep twice. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're not left with that one in your bag. So your bag's empty. So whatever you buy, you can pay a fist or a mask or whatever, and prep it on turn 2, which means that you're rolling it on turn 3 for sure.
Yeah.
So yes. Although there are pros and cons there as well, because sometimes I feel that maybe you want psychics out before Barry comes out.
Exactly.
So that the temptation to force attack Barry.
Yeah.
If he comes out first and you don't have any psychics, there's no problem to use your own force attack against you and make him come across the field not doing that much damage, because he's not accompanied by anybody. So sometimes it's maybe better to have a few psychics out first. So if he comes out on turn 4, that might actually be better. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
But after the first 3 turns, what was your typical experience? I suppose
yeah, I mean, usually it's just buy Barry and then go bananas with Mr. Sinister, to be honest. But, if your opponent then starts doing something awkward, for example, something like a Master Mold, an early purchase of a Master Mold on the other side of the board does change things quite quickly, because you then need to move into a bit more sort of defense, because obviously his ability, if he gets in rotation quickly, he can start spitting out those 5/5 tokens very quickly. You can get 3 on a turn if things go well, and those can be very difficult to get rid of. You can force attack them, but you take 5 damage. You really want to be removing those. I mean, you can do it with mutation, but you can get rid of 1 at a time. You can attack with your Barry, but that means you need to get the stuff in the field in order to be able to do that. So Master Mold definitely is a problem because of the volume of tokens that he's rolling. To be honest, it feels like it's often just who gets the best rolls. And who goes first, who goes first is big. Who goes first is big, definitely. I mean, it's strange, isn't it, that the condition that they introduced a few years back in terms of the die being out of play for the first player actually helps going first in this particular build of the team.
Mr. Sinister has a lot to answer for.
Yeah.
in my opinion. He's an enabler.
He does.
Not necessarily in a good way, but if you want to win with Barry, then it's a good way, I suppose.
Yeah.
But he also enables Master Mold in a similar way.
Yeah.
So Master Mold is a problem, and the win ratio between 2 fast teams seems to be about 50-50, is that?
Typically, I think it has been, and it just comes. A lot of it just comes. I mean, you say who goes first? Obviously, the rolls are massive, because whoever rolls their win con quicker is generally going to be very much on top.
It feels like if you miss it and your opponent gets it, you're kind of dead. Right?
It's difficult. Yeah. And that's particularly the case from the Barry side, though, I feel, because if you miss Master Mold, you've missed the opportunity of getting 3 tokens. If you miss Barry, you can just ramp and get him round again. But your opponent won't have those tokens in the field that they would have otherwise got. So it's, I mean, obviously it's a numbers game, and but it's a dice rolling game. So sometimes you need the luck of the gods with you. But yeah, sometimes it just feels like you're just trying to roll double 6 and see what happens.
What else is problematic? You mentioned Wonder Woman. Maybe that.
Yeah.
I can bring that up.
Wonder Woman is obviously very difficult. Well, James gets that up. She is a 6 cost though, so she's not much cheaper than Barry Allen himself. But if your opponent can get her in the field and keep her there, which obviously you're going to be wanting to force attack her off if you can, but then that obviously completely kills Barry because his ability is just useless. So then you really have to go for Plan B. I mean, generally the answer would be force attack, but if that can't be done, you can use mutation to get her out, swapping something else in. Mutation, as I mentioned before, is a really good defensive piece, so that's really useful. Another big issue can be Nefarious Broadcast, which is the basic action from which set, James? Is it Infinity Gauntlet?
It is.
Yeah. Which obviously cancels the opportunity to do any globals, which your opponent can activate on their turn, which obviously makes it impossible for you to use energy for Mr. Sinister because you can't use a global. It also means you can't do force attacks, which is also a pain as well. And it also potentially means you've got energy just sitting there doing nothing. So almost the threat of Nefarious Broadcast is almost as bad as the actual.
Yeah, they don't even necessarily there is an issue with not rolling Nefarious Broadcast, but your opponent, if they will stop saving energy so much on their turn because you don't want to waste 4 energy on the sort of 25% chance that they don't roll it. Even if, from my perspective, it seems like much more than a 25% chance that I won't roll it at all. Is it fair to say that? I mean, your team. If we just go back to your team, there is basically no. I mean, you've said this yourself. There's no control there apart from the force attack.
Exactly.
If you want to call that control. And so the answer to almost every control piece that's thrown against you is, I mean, in
Get
terms
it off
of
the field.
in terms of competing win cons, Master Mold is as good, if not better, and so those 2 are at the top, and nothing else is quite as fast. So if you want to beat it without using Master Mold, then you kind of probably need some form of control, and the answer to most of those pieces of control is to force attack them. And so most of the stuff that interferes, if it's not Master Mold, most of the stuff that challenges Barry is either gonna be control, which you somehow keep in the field by negating the force attack, or maybe by disrupting psychics, or by disrupting ramp, which you mentioned. So that Nefarious Broadcast, for example, achieves 2 of those things, which is basically it kills the Mr. Sinister ramp for your opponent because they want to be doing it on your turn, so that they've got access to their use pile. And it also stops them force attacking. So if you manage to get a control piece like Wonder Woman or Drax or Typhoid Mary, for example, in the field, if they manage to get that in the field along with Nefarious Broadcast, then they're not going to be able to force attack it across immediately, which sets them back by a turn, at least.
And one other trick potentially is to use those things in combination with something that blanks your force attack. So if you use the Typhoid Mary, for example, to blank Doomsday, then there's no more force attack, and then they could use something else to, you could put Wonder Woman in the field or something, and she wouldn't be able to be removed very easily at all. So yeah, I mean, this team is very much built on the rocket fuel to try to make it go as quickly as possible. And to be honest, a lot of the time that's actually good enough. What I didn't face in Dice Fight XL was a lot of similar teams. So I mean, you had a Barry team, but yours was probably not as quick.
I know. If anything, mine probably would have been quicker, but you just played it better because you used the force attack better.
Right.
I
Yeah.
actually had more prep on my team.
Oh,
so
that's true. Yeah.
we sort of had the same idea. I took the force attack off my team, like an idiot, and so I didn't. I didn't beat very many other people either, except Ben. But I didn't beat you even when the force stat was available, as I mentioned on the podcast, because you used the force stat much more effectively. In fact,
Right.
I think.
Yeah. The other team I played that had a Barry was Matt Brewer's, which was more controlly. He used the Wonder Woman, got my stun token, and then brought Barry to try to win, and that was very close. He was very close to doing that.
I think there is you need a little bit of luck, and maybe it just can't be quite as consistent. But I've been playing a little bit with control today, unaccustomed as I am, and perhaps this sort of combination of Nefarious Broadcast to negate the initial force attacks, and then Typhoid Mary to blank the force attack, combined with Barry himself later on. So basically doing what you intended to do in the first place, like a control bard team.
Yeah.
If somebody's clever enough to make that consistent, good on them.
I'm sure they are, and we may even see it this weekend. Who knows?
Indeed. Well,
what's going to be coming up?
Just to finish off, Spug, maybe we did allude to this a couple of times, but is there anything on your team that you would change? You have sort of mentioned a couple of things. I think you said, for example, instead of Arctic Breath, which you hardly used and was a bit of a liability, you might use Villainous Pact.
Yeah, that is true.
Anything else?
Well, the one thing that was actually a problem early on in games was rolling too many sidekicks. So actually, the Black Dwarf from Infinity Gauntlet that has the global enables you to spin down a sidekick. That would actually be very useful because that would solve that problem from rolling too many sidekicks. And obviously, it means that when you're ramping with Mr. Sinister, it does give you the option of spinning down one of those sidekicks if you need an extra energy, and obviously it gives you a fist. So and Wolverine's global is a fist, so that's pretty good.
And
I mean, there is
fist.
Barry's a fist, which is obviously great. Maybe another force attack. I mean, you could have a different force attack if you were worried about your Doomsday being blanked and that not.
It's not swingers, is it? It's slingers.
Slingers, not swingers. No. But there's also, I want to say Lex Luthor, but I'm not sure if that's right. But Vulcan. Sorry, yeah, you're right. Vulcan.
Vulcan's probably something you wouldn't want to see across the board, although because he would just kill your psychics, so there's your army gone. So if you could keep a Vulcan in the field,
well, then that's good. Yeah. And then probably the only other thing would be the Robin for the global, because obviously he is
like that one.
Pay a mask, field a character for free, which is quite good with Barry because his fielding costs are quite expensive. So it's that saves you 1 energy potentially if you're fielding him on his 2 side. Those are the main things. In terms of other problems that I forgot to mention, our old friend Dave is actually quite a big issue potentially for this team, and you managed to use him very effectively in our game to cling on to life the last couple of rounds, because obviously his ability is you can only take 7 damage. So that's massive on a team like Barry, where you're trying to win, generally speaking, with 1 big swing. If you can keep that damage down to 7, that's really helpful.
Most effectively used, I would say, if you yourself can perhaps win on the next turn. It's great for buying you a turn and then coming back and killing them, but otherwise it really is just clinging on, which is not fun.
As before, mutation is a good answer to him, because you can use mutation to put him in the field and then he's useless apart from as a blocker, but his ability doesn't count, so that's kind of good. And if you can keep him stuck in the field, then that's even better. Nefarious Broadcast we mentioned. The other thing is probably the Kang global again from Infinity Gauntlet, which I think is mixed. I mean, it can reduce damage of 7 or more down to 4, which can be the difference between life and death, but more often than not, I feel like your psychics don't get to 7.
Exactly, they're attacking with 5 or 6, generally speaking. I don't know. Yeah, certainly though, something to consider.
It sure is.
Okay, Spug. Is there? I think we're just on 30 minutes there.
30. Oh, right.
I know it was a bit more than we expected, but
Been waffling too. Sorry.
I think that was interesting. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we go?
Thank you, James.
Oh, my pleasure. Well, thank you everybody for listening. We hope you found that in some sense informative, useful, and entertaining. I hope you're happy to see our beautiful old men's faces. Spug is older than me. Just saying. Please do like, subscribe, and watch more vids. And if you're watching this still before Worlds, enjoy Worlds and beat Barry. Barry. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Bye.